Welcome back, class. Today we're going to continue to build up to the American Revolution. We're going to look at more things that the British did that just made the colonies mad. I think of Britain as like that older sibling, like the older sibling that just does stuff just to annoy you on purpose. Like they know it's annoying and they just keep doing it. Not me. I'm not that older sibling, but like most older siblings. All right, so today you should be able to identify the Townshend Acts and explain why it caused conflict between the colonists and the British. So what was the Townshend Act? What was the conflict? And why did that conflict take place? Now you're going to take Cornell-style notes today. Again, this goes in that left column. This goes in that middle column. You don't have to write it word for word. Summarize it. Put it in your own words. It's going to be easier to remember that way. All right? So, Parliament. Parliament passes a duty or a law on certain goods that colonies imported from Britain. And they picked these goods by the ones that the colonists were getting the most. So it's an extra tax, essentially, but they call it something else. And it was to help pay British debts. And it was British debts that came from the Quartering Act, ironically, or the fact that King George had to send people over here to make sure that the colonies were falling in line. It would essentially be like your parents making you pay for your babysitter. So these goods that they were putting these duties on include glass, paper of any kind, the ink that was used, lead for writing, and then tea, which is the big one. So any of these essentially become extra. They cost more because Britain is trying to pay these debts off from having to send additional people over here to watch the colonies and make sure they're following laws. Now, there's two views of the Townshend Acts. The British and the Loyalists, we talked about the Loyalists versus the Patriots view. The view of the Townshend Act is no different. There's two different views on it. The British and the Loyalists believe that colonists' bad behavior. So because the colonists could not follow the rules and stay in line, it made it to where somebody had to be there to keep an eye on them. We had to send somebody to the colonies because you couldn't follow the laws that we put in place. And so, as a result, the colonists needed to pay for that army that was sent there to both watch them and protect them. And that was because the colonists refused to follow the proclamation. So they're still getting in conflicts with the Native Americans. They kept trying to smuggle goods from the Stamp and the Sugar Act. So these troops had to be there to make sure that smugglers were taken care of. And so the Loyalists and British believed that the King George sending those extra people over here was a necessity. And it was as a result of the Colonist Act and the colonist behavior. And that is why the Townshend Act took place. But the Patriots do not feel that way. The Patriots or the colonists do not feel that way. They realize very clearly that duties are nothing but a tax in disguise. We're calling it something else. It is a tax. It doesn't matter if you change the name, it's still a tax. And the colonists are already mad about other taxes that have put in place because they feel that they are not represented. You are not giving us a voice. You're not allowing us a say in how these taxes are put together or implemented or even how the tax money is spent, but you're taking it from us without us being represented. And that no taxation without representation. They didn't want to be taxed if they didn't have a say in how the tax was put in place and how the tax revenue was spent. And so the Patriots believe you're just trying to tax us but call it something different. We know what you're doing. You're doing the same thing. Trying to call it something else. And so what happens is the Sons of Liberty, which is a protest group, comes together and they organize a boycott. They refuse to buy any British goods. We're not going to buy any British products. The boycotts were peaceful. It wasn't violent in any way, and anybody could join. And so the fact that it was peaceful and it wasn't violent and people weren't fighting made it to where everybody could kind of support this. They could get behind this. This works. we're cool with this idea. And women organize their own group called the Daughters of Liberty, and they start doing the same thing. They're boycotting British goods. They're making home-use cloth. So they're spinning their own cloth instead of buying cloth from England. They're making tea out of pine needles. I don't know how to do that. If you can send me proof that you made tea out of pine needles, I will give you extra credit. I don't know how that works. But instead of buying tea from Britain, they're making tea out of these pine needles and instead buy only goods made here in the colonies. And so what ends up happening is that these duties are repealed or taken away because the merchants that are back in Europe, specifically in England, they're like, please, we're losing money. We would rather them not have to pay the tax and at least still buy the goods, and at least it's profit. We can't keep losing money as a result of this. And so the duties are eventually repealed because the British merchants are losing money, and instead only tea would be taxed. Only tea would be taxed. But then this happens. There's a protest that is taking place in Boston. There's gatherers. They're there. They're yelling and they're shouting, and they just want their voices to be heard. They're happy that the majority of the Townshend Act had been repealed, but they're still not okay with the extra taxes on tea. And so the British Army shows up to a relatively peaceful protest. And once the British Army shows up, some people say that the colonists begin to throw rocks and snowballs. Now, these are not just regular snowball fight snowballs. These are like the ones made out of ice. You pack them real hard so that they hurt a lot. And they're throwing rocks and snowballs, and they're throwing them at the British troops. And for whatever reason, the British troops open fire on the protesting colonists. And what's ironic is that in today's world, and then throughout American history, we're going to keep going with this. Throughout American history, African Americans are not treated the same. Still today, there's a discrepancy between the treatment of minorities and white people. But the irony is that the first American to die for an American cause is a black man by the name of Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks was the first man shot in the Boston Massacre. He is killed and is the first colonist that is killed for the colonial, become the American cause. And so what happens is that Paul Revere, who becomes famous for a much different reason later on, has this painting made. Now, this is not exactly how it happened, but it becomes a source of propaganda. It is spread to the colonies, and the colonists are eating it like wildfire. They're what? That happened in Boston? And it becomes a rallying cry for the colonists, something that brings all the colonists together, because these other major cities start to realize, well, if that can happen in Boston, why can't it happen at our city? There are British soldiers here. What's keeping the British soldiers here from firing on us? And so it becomes a rallying cry to bring all the colonists together. And so the British and the Loyalist point of view still doesn't change. They believe that this is just proof that there are more troops needed in the colonies. They threw rocks at me, so I shot them. They said, we need more troops. The colonists are violent. This proves that they're violent. This proves that they won't listen. Their protests wouldn't disperse. We had no choice. We need more people here. The Patriots, again, like I said, use it as propaganda. It's a way to stir up feelings and emotions. And it was the proof that Patriots said, all All of these troops need to leave. They're violent. They're trigger happy. They're shooting. This is not okay. All right. And so we're going to see what happens after the Boston Massacre. We're also going to look at should it be called a massacre. And then we're going to look more into Crispus Attucks as well. You do have an assignment on Canvas, so make sure you complete that assignment. If you have any questions regarding the notes, the assignment, or anything we've done thus far, be sure to reach out to me. As always, you have a great day.